Did
Yes.
you listen to the All In podcast
I did.
last week's
Yes.
episode, the end of the year episode they did? I listen to that podcast pretty regularly, and then I don't know, towards the end of that episode they started talking about like essentially Hireframe.
And I'll jump in that this podcast, I think, is popular partially because people look to them. They tend to know what's coming around the corner.
So Jason Calacanis, he predicts that like the big trend that will be kind of the highlight or the headline for 2024 was, he called it AI plus outsourcing. All right, we're recording.
We're live.
We're live. New episode of our podcast, What Worked podcast. No guest today, just me and you, one-on-one.
No guest, maybe the most important guest, though. The VIPs were extremely humble and gracious in welcoming ourselves, the two most prolific co-founders we know.
Future Joe Rogan's here, future besties.
Hey, I've got the bald part down for Joe Rogan, so everything else I'm working on. I can't shoot a bow and arrow to save my life, but bald part, I got that. Anyway, yes. Welcome back to another episode of What Worked. Mike, we're getting dangerously close to crossing that elusive threshold of, I don't know if you want to say episode 7, episode 8. It seems like most podcasts die in and around that time. So I feel like we are pretty close.
We're crossing the chasm. We're still crossing.
But yeah, welcome to another episode of What Worked. We've had a lot of fun doing this podcast. And today we wanted to keep things fairly simple to start off the year. This is our first episode of 2024. And we thought, who better to ring in the new year than ourselves? Just kidding, sort of. But no, we wanted to quickly touch on some of the fun that we had last year in 2023 with this podcast, where it kind of fits in overall with not just Hireframe, our business, but also our personal lives, or goals and stuff like that. And then talk about what we want to do more of in 2024. And lastly, we do want to touch a little bit on some of the things that we personally learned last year, what worked, what didn't work. Mike, I've got a couple of Hireframe things, but I also have a couple of personal things too that I want to share.
Okay.
Yeah, why don't we first, Mike, I want to give credit where credit's due. This podcast was largely driven by you. The idea to do it, the really pushing us to get it done, going through a couple different iterations before we got to this one too, all the way down to, for anybody listening, whoever listened to the first couple episodes, literally all the episodes except for the most recent one, Mike personally recorded and taught himself how to edit those. So yeah, a lot of.
I don't know if I wanted you to out me like that.
If you thought they were bad and looked unprofessional, well then guess what? I'm looking at the guy,
the art.
That's right. He's our Scorsese. But but Mike, I wanted to give credit where credit's due. This really came from you, and I would love to hear your thoughts. I'm gonna be the interviewer here for this first part. Why don't you share with the audience here what was kind of your thinking, and why start a podcast? I know there's not a lot of podcasts out there, so why, right? So why start another one? Kind of like, what were you thinking, and how do you feel about those first few episodes of What Worked? Did they accomplish the goals you were trying to hit?
Yeah, look, so the podcast idea, super original, right? Two guys think people want to listen to what they have to say.
That's right.
And in a business one, for that fact.
Yeah.
For that matter.
No, those don't. There's not many of those out there.
Yeah, no. And so the idea behind a podcast, it's not an original one. It's just one that's been done time and time again. But really, I think there's like a personal side to this and a business aspect to this as well. And they kind of blend together for us, right? Our like personal professionalized are really integrated, at least
It's all
from
one.
what I can tell, yours and mine. But uh, on the personal side, I think, and we can dive into these, so I'll give kind of the headlines. Last year, I think I was feeling like a little bit, like I felt like we are plateauing in a bit. And it wasn't like a business growth plateau, it was a personal development plateau. We were so focused on many things. And one thing that we were forgetting to focus on was our own personal development and growth. So that's where the idea for a few different things came up, but we ultimately landed on a podcast. So for myself, just doing a podcast, like you said, editing a podcast was really like a new skill that would potentially add a component to newness and learning and development. And for me personally, I've public speaking, a skill like
Yeah.
that is something that I've always admired, like you for, and many other people. But I thought that doing this would allow me to, or really force me, it'd be a forcing mechanism to work on public speaking and try to get better at something like that. That's where it came from. And then from the business side, the headline is, look, we're trying to grow Hireframe, and we surprisingly don't have all the answers. And so
Nope.
we thought it would be a podcast would be a nice way to connect with friends and new friends and colleagues and customers and talk about different ways that they've had success growing businesses, and potentially even incorporate those ideas to what we're doing in Hireframe. So that's kind of the background. I don't remember if that's exactly how it all went down, but that's my recollection of where the podcast idea came from.
Yeah, permission to give a Tyler version of that. Might
Yeah.
be a slightly less filtered, more
It's
aggressive,
like,
but
yeah,
yeah,
it's like when you meet like a couple, you're like, couple,
yeah.
person
What
one,
was
person two,
your
like, how did you guys meet? Give us your like meet
totally,
cute.
totally? Yeah,
It's
yeah,
always like a
right.
little bit different.
It's like we exchanged looks across the room, and the person's like, "You were hammered, and we
We
were
met at
at
the
a
bar.
bar,
Yeah.
and you actually spilled a drink all over me." They remember it, yeah, totally differently. No, so I'm going to give my unfiltered version of what you just said. Definitely spot on. But you mentioned plateau. I would say that you and I were both to get a little bit vulnerable. I think we both were suffering from burnout. Which is pretty common. We had been building Hireframe together now for several years, and then also even before Hireframe, we were pursuing other things. We were doing things like trying to acquire a business. So we had been at it for a long time. And what was interesting was we had reached that point with Hireframe, I think, where we both were very, kind of heads down within the business, doing a lot of the day-to-day operations, and kind of just falling into this like natural cycle, habit, whatever you want to call it, where you're kind of grinding through, right? You're doing what has to get done. And for both of us, this has been something that we aligned on from day one when we decided to work together. We're both people that we really love personal development, both for ourselves and also our team members. And we had both, for whatever reason, we basically had stopped doing that. We were working a ton, but we weren't learning a whole lot. And it's funny, we both, I think, reached that conclusion separately. You were really great about, as you commonly are, I think in our relationship, you tend to put words to my feelings, and that was really great when you kind of were like, I we need to do something here. We need to do something different. And we got down to the heart of what we both were missing. And I'll just say, so I'm going to change plateau to burnout. And I'm also going to change, I'm going to put a little bit more aggressive words on our intentions with the podcast. The intentions are quite selfish in the best possible way. We, I think both, I'll speak for both of us, we really thrive off of meeting people, getting to know their stories, and learning from them. That's something that I think, I'll speak for our wives. I think they love, and it also annoys them a lot. You and I are both the types to find somebody at a party and like totally corner them. It's like, hey, you say you've got a pool cleaning business, and we're just like blistering them with a
Yeah.
thousand questions, right?
I was literally just at my next door neighbor's birthday party, and I
Yeah.
met her friend who flew in from New York, who opened up a ninja training studio,
Yes.
multiple
Yeah.
in Manhattan, Brooklyn, and I
Yeah.
latched onto her. I thought it was so fascinating, and we like
Totally.
spent 2 hours chatting about ninja training studios.
So, we're those types of people. And I think that a really interesting, speaking of like what worked, right? An interesting lesson that I've learned from a lot of successful founders is at some point you kind of have to figure out a way to, like you say, mix, blend, put, sort of loop in the things that you like to do with things that will ultimately also grow your business, allow you to accomplish your personal goals and your business goals. If you can find, you're always great about kind of doing those like Venn diagrams. If you can find that sweet spot of like the center, I'm sure there's a good name for that, but whatever that is, that center area where it all overlaps. That's a really good thing. And the podcast, that's why it's an insanely selfish thing that we're doing that should also hopefully lead to unselfish outcomes and results, right? So we're doing something that's really built for ourselves because we love to talk to interesting people, get their stories, and sort of learn from them. But podcasts are really cool because you can then turn around and you can share that with people. And we might not be, speaking of Joe Rogan, we might not be broadcasting this to millions of people. But what's been really cool about the podcast so far has been the immediate reaction. And I'll reference a specific favorite episode of mine, and I know it's probably yours too. It was our episode with Bentley from Park Hub. We are personally friends with Bentley. We've been to his wedding. We've also worked with him before in a professional capacity. So there's all of that before. There's history. But what was really cool and exceptional was getting all the text messages from our friends who know Bentley and know us and saying that they listened to the episode. They loved the episode. It was one of their favorite, podcasts, of the year. And that was just like the most fulfilling thing ever because Bentley just has an incredible story and it deserves to, be shared with a larger audience. And so I feel like we're already experiencing some of the really great effects of this.
Yeah, the Bentley podcast reminds me of something like Bentley is a friend. He's a customer of Hireframe. He's a colleague. We've spent many hours, traveling together, dinners, that sort of thing. But having done the podcast, what was awesome about spending time with him in that format was that we learned things about him that we didn't know. Even
Right.
though we've known the guy for so long, that was really
Yes.
cool and speaks to the power of the podcast format and just doing this.
Yeah, I feel like I could apply to a job on Bentley's behalf. I know a lot about I could be like the greatest recruiter ever for Bentley. So, and that's such a
Yeah.
cool thing to do with your friend. And I'm excited. So I'm gonna pivot here a little bit. Because I feel like we learned some really great things in those first couple episodes, but I'm going to also still continue my role here as interviewer. Mike, what are you looking to accomplish with this podcast in 2024? What do you feel like we hit on in our first few episodes last year? And how would you like to see that continue this year?
Yeah. So I don't know if this is a going to be a confusing answer, but I was thinking about this just brainstorming and having a cup of coffee the other day. But you know me, and there's something about me. One of the things about me is that I like to be very focused and intentional with the things I do, and that can be overdone sometimes. And so, one thing I learned from the first 4 episodes of doing this podcast is that you sometimes have to just like let the conversation evolve and scrap any kind of pre-existing outline in your head or plan for the conversation. You really need to be like present in that conversation and let it happen. Um, and so that's something I want to do more of in 2024. I think for me, you mentioned a couple starts and stops with this podcast, meaning like we tried this tried that, didn't like it, didn't work. So that's what didn't work. But I think what's really working for this is not being, at least for me personally, not being too stringent on what we do. And by that, I mean, hey, I think some episodes, it's going to be really great to kind of go back and talk through someone's body of work. And that reminds me of like Marcus's episode.
Yes.
He went back, you know, and he has such a rich experience, like work experience. And so that was really amazing to be able to have him share that with us and learn about what it was like um, at Groupon back in the day. But then
Right.
we also had an episode with Mike Gordon that was like very specific and tactical in nature. It was like a
Yeah.
30-minute masterclass on how to hire your first sales hire, right? And totally different. And so I think going forward next year, that's what I want to do, or I guess this year in 2024, is just continue to allow different formats, different conversation styles to happen. And I think that's going to be something I'm going to have to be cognizant of, because I like to do something and have a framework and have a format and focus on that. But I think for me, it's going to be just letting things evolve and seeing where things go.
Yeah, I love that. And I'll just add to your answer because I feel the same way. I think that the Bentley episode was so great, and a lot of that had to do with the fact that we had done our research on Bentley. We obviously knew him from before, but we did some really great prep calls with him. But I think that, to your point, I think that allowed the conversation to flow very naturally, and that's what made that just I'll speak for myself. You record these things. This is one of those funny things about podcasts or any type of media, to have to listen to yourself. You're like, it's just, you don't want to do it. But I found myself listening to that podcast like just like I wasn't even there for the recording, which is really cool. And I think that's reflective of the way the conversation flowed. But I
Yeah.
totally agree to your point on the Marcus episode, the Nick Masters episode, the Mike Gordon episode. The Mike Gordon one was really cool because what I've learned, I'll expand on what you just said. What I've learned with this podcast is that you got to try some stuff out, and you just cannot predict where people are going to sort of what they're going to latch onto, what they're
Yeah.
going to take from it, what's going to be timely. Because the Mike Gordon episode, I got several people that reached out to me and they mentioned, "Hey, listen to your podcast. Great timing. I'm actually looking to make my first sales hire," or I just had my first couple of sales, my first few sales hires, they failed spectacularly. So now
Mm-hmm.
I'm listening and I'm taking notes on the search method. Wow, this is a really great nugget of information. And after we recorded that episode, I would not have predicted that type of response. Because it was such a different episode from, say, our Bentley one. I think it followed the Bentley one. And
Mm-hmm.
so that was really interesting. So I've learned now, and this is where I really want to carry this on in this year, is that I think you gotta get better and better at the prep for these things. Really really learn about the guest, and try to get that to a place where that's secondhand knowledge versus just like on a Google Doc, right? Um, and then that's going to allow you to have that natural conversation that could flow in. Then what you want to do once you're there is don't try to put up dams. Don't try to flow it in a certain way. Allow it to reach natural conclusions. Get the guest to a place where they talk about things they're confident and comfortable with, and that's what's going to allow you to get those great nuggets. And the nuggets are really, I think, the heart of the podcast. So as I think about those learnings and what I want to do this year, a big thing on my mind, and this is going to be a call to anybody listening to this podcast, and I'll just put my personal email out there, Tyler@hireframe.com. We would love some more guests. If you know someone that would be interesting to have on the podcast, we're willing to look at anyone, of course, and see if it's a good fit. Also, I'll say I got this feedback, Mike, and I'm sure you did too. We would love to have some awesome women on this podcast. Some women in business, leaders, just obviously continue to also expand. We had a lot of guys, and we had specifically a lot of people in sales. So I'd love to kind of like branch out a little bit. So if you're listening and you think that you're a great fit, or if you think you know somebody, please email me, and let's set it up. But yeah, so that's, I think, doing more of these, and continuing to, sort of like hone in on these podcast skills, which I have a lot of, respect now for these podcasters. I did before, but even more so now that I'm quote unquote in the arena. um, but yeah, I, I was going to change directions here a little bit. So that's obviously
Yeah.
the podcast. And I was going to ask you, what if you had any learnings from this past year, 2023, as far as, business learnings, Hireframe. And then we can maybe get to personal too, towards the end. But I'd love to hear if you learned anything. Did you learn anything, Mike, in 2023?
Let me think. No. I, when I think about the last year, one of the things that like the first thing that comes to mind is how how wonderful it was to have people at our company that we've worked with for several years now. A lot of people from 2020, so 3+ years, and there's a level of synchron synchrony,
Mm,
or just trust that comes with that amount of time working together
sure.
that really affords effectiveness. That really brings a lot of effectiveness to your day to day. And last year was a challenging year for a lot of companies, including ours, and especially in the technology industry. And so to navigate choppy waters, I think it was just such a blessing to have people that we've worked with, that we trust, that we kind of can like speak, almost in like code and notes and that sort of thing. I just feel very fortunate to have had a great team in place. Um, and when I think about that, yes, of course, it comes down to finding great people and attracting great people to join your company. But I think a lot of that comes from working together for a long time. And so that's kind of like the theme that I thought about for last year, like what really worked for us. It's just having that level of tenure at our company, and just having been around for a while, it made it easy to weather the storms, continue growing, continue elevating everything that we do. It was nice to have a really good team in place.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think that again, this is you putting far better words to my feelings here. I totally agree. I think just to use a quick stat, and this is obviously not news to anyone. Last year in tech was really hard, and Hireframe is effectively we are firmly we're a staffing company, so we're firmly in human resources, human capital, and yeah, it was a wild ride to say the least last year in tech. Just as a quick number, in 2023, and I'll pull up this. We'll insert graphic here. Hopefully, we'll throw this into the video. But in 2023, a staggering number of 1,184 of tech companies announced layoffs, resulting in the displacement of 262,000 employees. And as most will note, this is capturing, W-2 employees. This number, it's probably closer to, my guess is it's probably closer to, I would say at least 3 to 5 times this number, because a lot of these tech companies employ a lot of contractors, or they use companies like Hireframe as well. And those are the numbers that don't get reported. So it's easily a multiple of that. So a lot of people, unfortunately, lost their jobs, and hopefully, a lot of them have been able to find new opportunities. But that is, and by the way, that number is up. It's an increase of 50% from the previous year in 2022. So, a crazy time in tech. And I think, just to speak, I'm not going to try to be anyone's news podcast here. I'm going to more just share what our perspective was, being a staffing, call it like partner, staffing vendor for a lot of these companies. What we just saw was, we saw companies that were really, effectively kind of almost like fighting for their lives, right? They had aggressive, changes that they had to mitigate, in order to preserve their burn rate, get to that next round of funding, hopefully just stay alive, right? Get to that next year, that next quarter. And on our end, right, being a staffing provider, we experienced the highs and the lows of this, right? We had a lot of our customers who did need to make tough decisions, and they needed to lay off their parts of their team. In some cases, that include Hireframers. But then we also had a lot of customers that made decisions to either reduce their own internal staff and hire with Hireframe, or they also, a lot of them made the decision just to turn a lot of their new requirements to Hireframe. So we experienced both sides. But to your point, I will totally agree that the learning that I came away from was that the years of establishing relationships and rapport and truly understanding their business, and having, like, people always use the partnership word, right? But being truly like a partner versus a vendor, we saw that paid off in every great relationship that we have. Even when we went through tough times with those companies and those partners, it was still just, I would describe it as very manageable because of that. And then also, to your point, our internal team, right? We've had now folks who have been with us now for 3-4 years, and it's been really great. Our internal team knows the way we work. They know what's important. They know what you and I fight for on a
They
daily
understand our
basis.
customers.
They understand our customers, and they understand, and that was really cool too. I will bring up, I won't mention obviously the company. We'll keep their information private. But we had a customer that went through a large layoff, right? And what I was really impressed with was the level of empathy that our team had for that customer's hire framers and that customer's internal team members. It was just, it's all I could ever hope for and more in what we would have as far as like the character of the people that are working here at Hireframe. So yeah, that was a huge learning for me, and obviously,
Yeah,
I'm not expecting that to calm down anytime soon. I think 2024 will continue to be a bit of a roller coaster, and yeah, just doubling down on those relationships, and you put the time in now so you can weather any future storm. That's kind of how
totally.
I see it.
Yeah, like at the, say it's December, right around Christmas this year, 2024. Like what do you want to have accomplished with this podcast?
Oh, awesome question. So, you and I have talked about some very specific goals. So I would love to get to a point where we're doing an episode a week. That's super important to me, and that's just a function of at bats, right? I think the more at bats you get, the better you get at it. The more of it's also it's like a snowball effect, right? You get guests, those guests refer you to other guests, people hear about you, and so ain't I always use this phrase. It's the dumbest phrase ever, but I love it. Ain't nothing to it but to do it. I think about that with many things in life, and so I would like to get there, and I would love it, love it, love it. What would be really cool is to meet somebody who I've never met before and have them bring up the podcast. I think this is possible. I think this is a goal for 2024. I'd love to do that. And yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to think. What do you have any specific
I think it's
goals
I think
around
those
that?
are very possible. Yeah, I was gonna say like I like similar to what you're saying, like have someone you don't know come to you. I was thinking just like have people like we it's already started, but just to have more people reach out to us and say this was helpful because ultimately like that's one of my primary goals with the podcast is to
Yeah.
obviously learn for ourselves, but to share this so that other people can get something out of it. So the more feedback like that we get, the more we know we're going down the right path, I think, with this thing.
Totally.
So yeah, I want to see, I want to hear those, that kind of feedback more frequently, from more people.
I have something for you that's yours that I'm gonna serve back up to you, and I think this is a tremendous goal. The What Worked alumni community. So we're building this. We've got the inklings of it. We've already started to communicate with the past guests. I think that an incredible mark of success will be if our guests start to network with each other, and
Totally. Yeah, that'd
if
be really
if
cool.
if anything comes from that, that's really cool. So this is like the beginnings of a community, and so whether people exchange information, refer each other for different opportunities, just grab coffee or something like that. That to me would be incredible, and I would love to. I think it's very possible for this year. So December, we'll
Yeah,
have to.
very possible. I think this is all within
Yeah.
within reach for sure.
Yes, yes. We'll have to sit
Yeah.
back and do a reflective episode in December and just see where we're at. Personally, let's sort of round things out on this episode. Did you personally learn anything last year? Any personal learnings? I know that this year is going to be an exciting year for you for one very specific reason. But I'll let you share that if you want to,
Yeah,
or
it's how I
or,
was
or you
referring
don't say anything.
to. Yeah, we're having a kid, this our first kid this year, so starting the family.
There we go.
So that's very exciting.
Very exciting.
Oh, so yeah, so some things on the personal front that I learned. Oh, I gotta think about this one. Now I might take it. I might take a second. 'Cause
Yeah.
there's a lot, but I think for me, there's I guess an unlock that I've had
Mhm.
is just like, it's almost like a cue that I've like
Yeah.
conditioned myself to note. It's
Mhm.
whenever I have the thought of um, reaching out to someone and saying something, I just do it now. Whereas
I
before I'd
like
be
that.
like, oh, should I text this person, or should I text this person this thought that I have?
Totally.
Or should I call this person? And
Yeah.
usually kind of like I allowed that thought to be fleeting, and
Yeah.
then I'd go on with the rest of my day. And I'm trying to get better at just doing it. Um,
Yeah.
and yeah, so hopefully by the end of this year, in 12 months or so, that muscle's been built up a little bit even more. But that's something I learned last year, is just how nice it feels to do that. And I guess it comes down to like connection, and staying in touch with people. That was
Yeah.
like something that really elevated my 2023 towards the end of the year.
That's awesome. I'm gonna
Yeah.
continue the theme. I'm just gonna continue piggybacking on everything you say. Um, and that I will say that I definitely, I think, learned a similar lesson. My personal life, what my mother-in-law went through a pretty serious health scare, and that has been on my mind, ever since. Just thinking about not waiting. And I think that, and I'm gonna loop all this in. I so I too am expecting, or my wife is expecting. I always think it's weird. We're having a baby. I never always feels weird, but we're having a baby. No, we are having number two is coming. Same time as Mike and his wife, so that's gonna be fun. Maybe we'll do a podcast where the babies are just here and they're
Yeah, they're,
just
they're the
like
guests.
they're cooing at each other. Exactly. So yes. So got number two coming. I feel like parenthood is just a never ending series of daily lessons. Like, so I learned a lot from that. But to your point about not waiting, definitely with our daughter turned two last year. And for those first 2 years of life, I really got totally sucked into the vortex of parenting and trying to build a business. And I just kind of like lost touch with almost everything else. And, you know, I've just, in going through the experience with my mother-in-law and then other kind of life things, just being like, if you think of it, reach out to a person. And you commonly think like, well, I feel bad, I haven't talked to them in forever, or, um, if I reach out to them, then I need to make plans to see them, right? Um, and I think most people, as you get older, like everyone gets it. You have stuff going on. It's hard to, make it happen. But what's really, really bad is I notice, like, for example, I don't know if you've had this experience on LinkedIn. I'll say happy birthday to someone, and then I'll see that the last time I messaged them, I said happy birthday. That means a
A double
full
happy
year,
birthday.
a double happy birthday. And that's all I ever say to them is happy birthday. And that really makes me sad, because that's not my intention. That's not the person that I am. And so, yeah, so now I've just learned, don't like, it's like anything else. You gotta just do it, and you gotta be realistic about it. You're not going to be like, every week I'm going to have coffee with 3 friends, like that's hard to do, especially when you have kids. Um, but you just have to do it. So that was a big, personal learning for me. I will say, and this is my last bit here, about, you mentioned about the December 2024 and thinking about what I want to accomplish with this podcast. I have 2 things. So, parenting. I would like to make more friends with people that are parents that are also building companies, or they're, key employees at companies, like early employees. I'd like more friends like that. So
Mm,
I'm going to selfishly use this podcast. I'd like to maybe do like a series almost of sorts, which is, a lot of people we're talking to have kids, but I would like to do, I don't have the exact workings of this. Maybe it doesn't need to be its own episode, but I'd like to spend a little bit more time asking our guests, how they do it, how they
how
manage
they
it,
do it. Yeah, behind the
what they've
scenes.
what they've learned, because I feel like I learn a lot, and I learn a lot from other parents. So selfishly, I'd like to do that. And then also, last year, in us realizing our burnout, I challenged myself to start learning again, and I did CRO school, and I promised LinkedIn that I would take LinkedIn, my network, along for the ride, and I failed at that. I haven't done that, but I like to be a man of my word. So what I'm going to do this year is I'm going to do that via this podcast. I'm going to reach out to every single, guest lecturer that I had at that school, get them by hook or by crook on the pod, and distill some of those learnings that I got from that school to, anyone who's willing to listen to this. So those are
Yeah,
some things that I
I
want
see
to
that
do.
being very valuable. Yeah, well, let's check in on these things like in December, or I guess maybe January next year. You're gonna
Yes.
start to fly by, so it'll happen before we know it. But yeah, we're running up on time here, so maybe we're wrap things. Oh, before we wrap up, did
Yes.
you listen to the All In podcast
I did.
last week's
Yes.
episode, the end of
Uh,
the year episode they did?
yes, and I know exactly the moment you're going to talk about.
Okay, yeah, yeah. So
Say it.
the JCal trend.
Yes. It was almost
Okay,
as if he
so
was like, soft pitching
he was
Hireframe.
in their words, they were talking our book. So
They
it's
were
pretty
talking our
cool,
book.
right? Yeah,
Yes.
it was.
Super
I
cool.
because I listen to that podcast pretty regularly, and then yeah, I don't know. Towards the end of that episode, they started talking about like essentially Hireframe. Um,
Well, explain it for anyone who's listening who doesn't listen to
yeah.
also All In. What
So the
was it?
All In podcast is pretty popular business podcast. It's like 4 guys from that came up through Silicon Valley, successful operators, sold businesses, been very successful venture capitalists too. And one of them, Jason Calacanis, they were all going around the table and they were talking about trends that they foresee, growing in popularity in 2024.
And I'll jump in that this podcast, I think, is popular partially because people look to them. They tend to know what's coming around the corner. They're pretty prolific about making accurate predictions. So this
Yeah,
particular episode was all about the predictions they have for 2024. And this one
yeah,
that they rolled
and
out was a
so
pretty good one.
Jason Calacanis, he predicts that like the big trend that will be kind of the highlight or the headline for 2024 was he called it AI plus outsourcing. So
Yes.
obviously the outsourcing part was what was like the Hireframe call out essentially. And as a venture capitalist, he gets pitched dozens of times a week. I imagine he sees a lot of companies, and also he just is like an operator type himself. And so he was saying that he's seeing more and more companies are leveraging talent, international talent. to find expertise they can't find here in the States, to reduce burn, to add flexibility to their operating structure. And so that was really nice to hear him say that he's seeing more and more companies come across his table that are leveraging essentially our services. And that was really cool. And then he goes on, he pieces together like a few
Hmm.
events over the past few years, which is
Yes.
really interesting. He talks about how in 2020, obviously the big thing that happened all across the world was the COVID pandemic,
Yes.
and we all worked from home. So remote
Yeah.
work became a thing. And you remember those times, how many Google Meets or Zooms did you join where you had to like help someone navigate the mute button or like, hey,
Yes.
sir, your camera's not on. So
Yep.
we all had to learn how to work remotely for
Yep.
the most part. And so companies had to establish this competency in managing a remote company. And then a
Yeah.
lot of companies have been founded since then and have just become remote first, no offices, right? Part of the
Right.
kind of commercial real estate crisis that we might be going through right now.
Yeah.
And because of there's this competency, JCal pretty much said like, hey, it doesn't make a difference if you're in Minneapolis or Manila because we're
Hmm.
all working remote anyways. And
Yeah.
that really, obviously caught my ear because we have a huge team in Manila, and we've been doing this for a while. When we started this company in 2019, like we didn't know a pandemic was about to happen in 2020. We didn't
Yep.
know that remote work was going to become so universal. So, obviously that it's feel very lucky that we caught those tailwinds, and
Without a
and
doubt. Yeah.
it's always nice to hear, to receive, a point of validation for something that you've been working on for so many years. So it's refreshing to hear.
Yeah, and I'll say like totally. I mean, you and I are both consumers of a lot of podcasts, and specifically, business podcasts, and all the time they're bringing up these things. Oh, like personal storage industry and all these types of things, and you think like, what's it like? I don't know how you are, but I would always be like, man, what would it be like to be a founder of one of those companies and hear someone say that like your thing's the hot thing. Um, so this was really cool to experience that. And I'll say
Yeah.
a lot of what he talked about definitely matched what I think we've been experiencing at Hireframe. The shift that I've really seen just since the inception of the company, I think that now it's like remote work is just so common, right? So people think about it in a totally different way, where they like you said, they're so used to it, they don't even. It's not even something that you have to kind of like clear as a hurdle. Companies are set up for it; they're ready to do it. But what I've seen also is that the shift has been, from thinking of using remote team members, it was always the same thing. Customer service, maybe some very basic things like, Shopify web design or something like that, right?
Data entry.
Data entry, right? All these kind of like low hanging fruit, in many cases, entry level jobs. And what we've seen, and it's why we talk about it in this way for Hireframe, is that we talk about um, you know hiring mission critical positions for companies, right? So that's the big difference, is that now the conversations that we're having are with the executive leadership team at the company, and commonly they're saying, what all can you take on? And they're just throwing a whole list of roles at us, and there's no longer this, oh, can you guys do customer service? It's now a much broader conversation, and it's much more senior level positions. And to me,
Hmm.
I feel like we are at the beginning of what will be a fundamental shift in the way companies are built, in that there's no
Yeah.
longer these common kind of structures are no longer in place.
Yeah.
There's
And
a lot
specifically
more
in
flexibility.
technology,
Yes.
it's validating to hear those words from JCal because we respect him so much, but also
Yes.
because he is in the technology industry, which is the bulk of our customers.
Right.
So to know that, that he's seeing that in that space, in 2019 when we were just getting started, we just kind of stumbled into this customer segment of software companies,
Yes.
enterprise software.
Yep.
And yeah, and so we've been working at this for going on 5 years now,
Yes.
trying to hire mission critical roles for enterprise software companies and just venture
Yep.
back technology companies. So coming from people who are deeply embedded in the space meant a lot. And I was actually thinking, did you like off the top of my head, there's like at least a couple of craft ventures companies that we
Yes.
worked with, and that's
Yeah.
David Sachs's fund.
Definitely.
So I'm kind of fanboying here, but the crossover between the All
Oh,
In
yeah.
podcast and the work that we've done, I actually never really thought of that. I've always listened as a fan, and now
Yeah.
to see that there's crossover in the work we're doing with the work they're doing, it's pretty awesome.
No, anytime he talks about some of his high performing, I mean, I know for a fact that we, have worked with one of his highest performing portfolio companies, and so anytime I will say, without a doubt, I feel pretty cool whenever he references his own portfolio and some of the ones that are performing well, because I know I know the back end story of that, and it is cool. It is kind of a cool, crossover where you hear him referencing certain things that they're talking about in board meetings, metrics they're looking for, and to be able to do a little bit of a dotted line to be like, yeah, I know how you got to some of those, and we were a part of that story in some way. Yes, it's absolutely cool. So yeah, we
Yeah.
essentially we are unofficially endorsed by the All In podcast. No, I'm
Yeah.
kidding. I don't
No,
want to get in
yeah, I
trouble,
was curious if
but
you saw that. That was just like,
of course,
yeah,
come
no,
on
that
now.
was like cool to hear
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
and exciting to hear just to kick off this year. I think giving a little bit of a juice here as we go into
Super cool.
2024.
On that note, let's continue on our way into 2024. Again, anyone who is listening to this, thank you so much. Please do us a solid and subscribe. So whether you're listening on Apple or Spotify or whatever, you can always subscribe to the episodes. We also do a lot of clips on our YouTube channel, so you can check those out. So if you don't want to miss these episodes, especially once we go to once a week, please do that. So like and subscribe, and then
Yeah.
also we definitely want to hear your feedback. So if there's things that you want to see or things that you think will make the podcast better, we'd love to hear from you. Or if you have a potential guest, even if that guest is you, please email us. You can just email me, Tyler@hireframe.com, and we'll check it out. But thank you so
Yeah.
much, and cheers
Thanks.
to 2024. Let's get it.
Let's get it.